Hey YouTubers and Patriots, Voice of the Composer here. Welcome back to my channel. It is Thursday. Hope you're all getting geared up for the weekend. And I wanted to do a video about 4 African American or Black composers in honor of Black History Month, but I have to be honest about something. I don't celebrate Black History Month, or Gay Pride Month, or International Women's Month, pick your nose month, whatever you want to call it. I just don't celebrate it because I believe everybody should be treated the same. And if you're setting aside a particular month of the year for a particular group, is then not saying to that group, you're special, you're different, you deserve special treatment. So that's why I don't celebrate these special months of the year for any given group. Now, before I go any further, and we'll get to these 4 composers here in a moment, I have to cram as much as I can into a video, given my work schedule. And I kind of look at this channel this way. Think of it as an old radio set, where you turn the knobs, you tune into that hard-to-get station sometimes, but you know when you get a chance to tune into it, you're going to get something good. So you're not going to see any, as I call it, pretty boy camera angles. The video's not going to be perfect. I may not always have the right words to say, but that's not the point. The point is to bring you the information. And if you've been supporting the series, thank you for being a part of this thing called Voice of the Composer. If you're new, welcome to this thing called Voice of the Composer. Now, if you're not familiar with the series, I'm an amateur composer. I write music in my spare time. I have a day job. I do this YouTube channel on the side. And I love bringing to light music by lesser-known composers. And I want to preserve our history and culture as Americans. And you might get a tinge of politics here and there, especially seeing how last year they were taking down all these Confederate statues. But they didn't stop there. They went for Thomas Jefferson and George Washington, you name it. And what's going on today with this second impeachment trial with Trump, well, it's kind of the same thing. They don't want Trump to ever run for office again because they don't like his brand of politics. They don't like what he has to say. Well, you know what? The First Amendment protects freedom of speech, and that includes impolite speech. And of course, the Democrats are trying to portray you average Americans out there, you patriots, those of you who voted for Trump. They're trying to say that you're insurrectionist, that you're violent. That's what the whole message was yesterday. And I love how they tried to edit this video. They showed all these little clips of what happened January 6th at the U.S. Capitol. And they left something very important out of the video. Right before Trump, or right just as Trump was about to say this, they cut off the video. He said, we're going to march to the Capitol. Well, they forgot. Well, I don't think they forgot to put this in here. They meant to edit this out. He said, we're going to peacefully and patriotically make our voices heard. And I'm really proud of the Republicans who showed some backbone yesterday by fighting back and throwing this whole notion of insurrection or the fact that Trump said we're going to fight like hell or you need to fight like hell, throw it back in the Democrats' face. It's about time, Republicans. About time, rhinos. And what they did is they requoted or retweeted what was said by people like Swalwell. You know, the guy who's been having the midnight rendezvous with the Chinese honeypot, and Raskin, who's part of what they're calling the impeachment managers. Impeachment managers, I love that. These people can't manage their way out of a wet paper bag, okay? But the Republicans finally turned this on the Dems by using their own language against them. How many riots did we have last year? In Seattle, Portland, Minneapolis, you name it. Remember in Seattle, they created CHAZ or CHOP, the Capitol Hill Autonomous Zone. The people in the BLM Antifa movement did this. Maybe not necessarily BLM, but primarily Antifa, these ultra-left activists. They warded off a certain part of the city in Seattle and called it CHAZ. That's not insurrection. And I'm hoping that the Republicans tomorrow, that they really go after the Dems and they really expose them for who they are and show all these riots in Minneapolis, Seattle, Atlanta, Portland, you name it, and play back what some of these Democrats in Congress have said on the Senate floor or the House floor or what have you. Now, do you remember this happened in 2004? And Rush Limbaugh's talked about this. A few other people in right-wing radio have talked about this. But in 2004, there was a memorial service for Paul Wellstone. He was a well-liked guy, kind of middle of the road. He was a Democrat, but middle of the road. And they had this memorial service. Well, they turned the memorial service into a DNC rally. And they said, we're going to organize, we're going to get on that beautiful green bus. That's not a form of insurrection. And I did a video previously talking about what actually happened in the U.S. Capitol building, how what the media is reporting isn't matching up with what the timeline is, or what the timeline was on January 6th. And they were kind of showing that, the Democrats yesterday were showing when Trump spoke, that his speech ended at 1:11 p.m. But what they failed to mention is that the first wave of protesters, as I've said before, started arriving somewhere between 12:40 p.m. and 12:55 p.m. But it's a 45-minute walk from the ellipse where Trump was giving his speech. Once again, nowhere in the speech did he specifically direct any of his supporters to go to the Capitol building, break windows, engage in insurrection, disrupt Congress, what have you. You're not going to find it anywhere in his speech. Nowhere in his speech will you find that. So I'm really hoping that these Democrats get what's coming to them. You know the old saying, be careful what you wish for, you might just get it. Because they were trying to show this timeline yesterday. And right there, they exposed themselves. Right there, they showed, by showing this timeline, by showing when Trump ended his speech, that Trump supporters had nothing to do with what was going on at the Capitol building. Now, yes, you may have had Trump supporters at the Capitol building previously, before the speech, wandering around, taking selfies, what have you. There's nothing wrong with that. Our tax dollars pay for that building, Nancy Pelosi. Now, they had this, well, I'm thinking about it, they had this memorial service for that officer that was killed, and they're holding this guy up as a saint. Now, granted, he lost his life. DC police officer. But from what I understand, politicians in DC have a very low view of DC police. And it looked like this memorial service looked like some type of fraternity ritual or something you'd see with the Masons. No knock on the Masons or any group like that. But really, it looked like one of these odd rituals from one of these fraternity or fraternal organizations. And Nancy Pelosi gets up there and she says, this is our temple of democracy. That's all you need to know. To them, the Capitol building is sacred because it's their Capitol building. Well, first of all, you work for us, buddy. You work for us. Our taxes pay your salary. Our taxes pay for that building. So if we want to go to the U.S. Capitol building, we have every right to do it any time of day we want to go because we paid for it. Now, I'm not suggesting you go there and harass senators or do what these people did on January 6th. But as it has come out, all these people that are rioting and attacking the Capitol building, well, they were part of this far, far right group that Trump supporters would never associate with, or part of this far, far left group. But the truth is they're all leftist. That's the truth about it. People say that the Third Reich was this far, far right group. No, they were actually left. They may have not, but Hitler did not believe in communism. He hated communism. But he loved power. And he wanted to be a dictator. And he adopted a lot of these principles that you have seen throughout history with other dictators like Stalin or Mao or what have you. All leftists, by the way, all ultra-left. Not ultra-right, but ultra-left. Because people on the right believe in freedom. I'm an independent voter. I believe in freedom. I believe in the Constitution. I love this country. So before I get too far afield here, let's get into these composers. Because this is really... Now, I got to share this story with you because this is funny. Because this does play into what's going on here with the second impeachment trial. And it's fun to watch what's going on in Washington, D.C. But there's a story about a sax player that was at one of these Muzak recording sessions. And he got a little too into one of these numbers they were working on. And the producer said, "Whoa, buddy, you got to back off a little bit. Got to be a little bit more mellow. Getting a little too far into it." That's funny, folks. That's really funny. Telling some guy at a Muzak recording session he's getting a little too into it, they need to back off, be a little more mellow because it's Muzak. I get a crack out of that every time I hear it. I really do. By the way, you like the video so far, please click that like button, subscribe. Hit me up on Instagram at #JasonComposes. Leave comments below. Or you can reach me at Twitter, Voice of the Composer Twitter. So let's talk about these 4 composers. Because everyone says, it's Black History Month. We should be celebrating the artistic achievements of African Americans, and I agree with that. But like I said, I don't celebrate these special months of the year for any particular group. This music deserves to be heard year-round because it's great music. So the first person we're going to talk about is Joseph Boulogne Chevalier de Saint-Georges. I'm just going to give you a very brief bio on these composers and tell you some suggested works. So Saint-Georges was born in 1745, died in 1799. He was a composer. He was a violinist, one of the best violinists of his day. Those who are in the know in the violin community, they know the music of Saint-Georges. Any violinist worth his salt knows the music of Saint-Georges. It's like they know the music of Vuitton and the French school. So he was a conductor of the leading orchestra in Paris at the time. He was a renowned fencer. And he was born in the French colony of Guadeloupe. His father was French. He was actually a wealthy planter. And Saint-Georges was also the son of his father's mistress, who was an African slave who happened to be his father's wife's slave. We may look at that and say, wow, that's terrible, and how could he do this and take advantage of a female African slave? Well, the truth is, in those days, it was not uncommon for men and women to have affairs. It didn't matter if you were a slave owner or not, and it didn't matter if you were an African slave or not. Truth is that people had affairs back then. And you got to remember, transportation wasn't as good as it is now. So men would go on these long journeys, and a lot of times they'd have a mistress with them. Sometimes it wasn't, or it wasn't necessarily an intimate relationship. A lot of times it was just for appearances, because a lot of times these marriages were arranged, and women had affairs too. So they'd have male companions. Now, it wasn't talked about as much. That was a taboo subject then. That's what made the book Madame Bovary so sensational. That's why it was banned in Paris. So Flaubert's Madame Bovary. And a few years back, maybe this was a decade or so ago, there was a really good movie or remake of Madame Bovary. And you can probably find that here on YouTube, or just by searching Google, you can look for it. So, like I said, wasn't uncommon for men in those days to have a mistress. Wasn't uncommon for women to have a male companion. These marriages, in a lot of ways, were arranged, and women used these marriages as a way to work their way up in society or climb the social ladder. But Saint-Georges' father, his name was, looking here at my notes, his name was Georges Boulogne, and Georges Boulogne supported his son. Absolutely supported his son. And when people tried to attack his son, he said, stand up for yourself. He was behind him 100% in his education. In fact, he took him to Paris, and he was taken under the wing of the composer Gosseck. So he was trained under Gosseck, and I think a few other composers. But excellent composer, interesting story. So check out the music of Joseph Boulogne Chevalier de Saint-Georges, 1745 to 1799. Suggested works by Saint-Georges include his violin concerto in D major, excellent piece, his symphony in G major, and the ballet music from the opera L'Amant Anonyme, Comédie Mêlée d'Ariatis. Now, the ballet music is more well-known than the opera itself. But these are works to check out, music of Chevalier de Saint-Georges. Next, we have Florence Price. Florence Price, African-American woman composer. She was the first African-American woman composer to have a piece of music premiered by a major orchestra. She lived from 1887 to 1953. She wrote in a more classical style and mixed African-American rhythms with that, or African idioms with that, including the Juba dance and Southern folk songs in her music. And she was writing in this neo-romantic style at a time when there were a lot of changes in music. So much of her music fell dead, not because of racism, but because of the taste of the time. Remember, this is the time of Stravinsky's Rite of Spring and other works, modern works that were premiering at the time. Remember how controversial Rite of Spring was when it premiered. There were fistfights in the audience. And you have the introduction of jazz music, big band or swing, and then you have the introduction of rock and roll. So you can imagine writing a symphony in the middle of all this change that's taken place at the early part of the 20th century. But the really cool story, she was married twice, by the way. And in her second marriage, she never really divorced. They just separated. But she had a series of works, or a collection of works that were found in a rundown house or abandoned house on the outskirts of St. Anne. I can't even read my own notes here. Of St. Anne, Illinois. And in 2018, the New York firm G. Schirmer announced exclusive worldwide rights to the Price catalog. And this is some excellent music. Yeah, definitely check it out. Music of Florence Price. And some of the works to look out for are Symphony Numbers 1 and 4, Symphony Number 1 E minor, Number 4 in D minor, her Piano Concerto in D minor, and the Violin Concerto in D major. I've heard the first symphony, and I've heard the Piano Concerto. Excellent, excellent pieces of music. Go check it out. Naxos, I think in 2019, or maybe 2018, they released a recording of Florence Price's First and Fourth Symphony. So definitely check out the music of Florence Price. Next, we have William Grant Still, who was called the Dean of African American Composers, lived from 1895 to 1978, and he was born in Woodville, Mississippi. By the way, Florence Price was born in Little Rock, Arkansas. And he had a very distinguished career. And he worked in many different genres, including with Paul Whiteman. But he was the first African American to have a major work premiered by a major orchestra. And that was his first symphony, his Afro-American Symphony. And I believe that was in 1931, 1932. But he served in World War I in the Navy and was involved in all sorts of musical projects, wrote many, many pieces of music. Very prolific. Now, he originally was going to go to medical school, but that didn't pan out, and he ended up at a conservatory where he studied music. But he had to pick up odd jobs because he couldn't afford to continue college. And when his professor asked him, why aren't you focusing on your music studies? He said, honestly, I just can't afford it. So upon hearing this, people offered to teach him for free. And he wrote, like I said, some fabulous music. Very, very prolific composer, William Grant Still, probably one of the most famous of all African-American composers. And some of the works to look out for with William Grant Still, like I mentioned before, his Symphony Number 1, the African-American Symphony, his Festive Overture and the opera, A Bayou Legend, which, by the way, was the first opera by an African-American to be televised live on TV. It was televised in 1981. So definitely check out the music of William Grant Still. And finally, we have the music of Edmond Dadi. Now, Dadi is a very cool character. Dadi was born in 1827, died in 1901, and he became such a popular figure in 19th century musical life that when he returned from Europe, because he had gone to Europe to help a friend set up his cigar business in Europe, and at the end of the Mexican-American War, he went to Mexico to help his friend as well, earn money in this cigar factory or the cigar business so he could go over to Europe. And when he was in Europe, he studied with composers like Halévy and Deflon. So definitely some distinguished composers that he had connections with. But he was so well liked, so well loved, that upon his return to the United States in 1893, when the freighter was coming back, it practically sank. And he narrowly escaped the sinking of the ship. And they gave three concerts in his honor. Can't even talk today. They gave 3 concerts in his honor in New Orleans, if that tells you anything. So check out the music of Edmond Dadi. Like I said, very cool character. He ended up becoming he was a child prodigy. He studied the violin. and played some other instruments. He was also head of the orchestra at the Bordeaux Opera. But here's some of the works to look for by Emma Dadé. His Quasimodo Symphony, I'm still waiting for a recording of that. His piece Chicago is a piece to check out, as well as some of his smaller overtures and the opera La Palomère, or his La Palomère Overture, which I believe is an overture to an opera. So these are some of the pieces to check out by Emma Dadé. So you have Florence Price, St. George, William Granville, Emma Dadé, African-American composers. But don't look at these composers as African-American composers. Look at them as composers, as I do. And listen to their music. And be inspired by their music. Because these are great artists. That music deserves to be heard. As I've said many times, you got great music or great art, bring it to the table. Let's hear it. Let's see it. So I hope you enjoyed the video. If you did, once again, please click that like button, subscribe, hit me up on Instagram at #JasonComposes. Leave comments below, and I'll probably be posting something tomorrow. We're going to talk about the Confederate flag again because North Carolina is banning the Confederate flag from license plates. So thanks for being with me. Voice of the Composer saying peace out. Catch you next time. Stay safe, everybody, and God bless this great country.